I teased it before. I think Marquette is the team that has the best chance to make a run in March out of the Big East, Ashton. They just beat up on Villanova. They've swept Villanova. They are probably the hottest team in college basketball. I know that Providence picked them off at home. I think I might have been more impressed that Marquette was able to hang with the team as good as Providence in their own building. So what do you make of that? Are they the team best suited from the Big East to make a deep run in March?
As of now, yes. I loved Villanova for a while, and I thought their outing against the Wildcats was unbelievable. I think Shaka Smart has done a great job with their culture early on. Tyler Kolek, a lot of people didn't like him. Going from George Mason to the Big East, making a big jump like that. He's doing a really good job at point guard for them, making big shots, but being under control. And then you talk about Darryl Morcell and Justin Lewis. These are two of the top players in the Big East. I think Justin Lewis has to be, number one right now in the Big East Player of the Year. If you're talking about rankings right now, and then they defend. I think they really do a good job of defending, keeping guys in front of them, contesting shots, and they never get rattled. I think that's one of their biggest traits. They don't get rattled as other teams go on runs. You rarely see guys getting rattled, and they don't get phased out. And I think that's a testament to Shaka Smart's coaching and just building that culture within. And they're playing their best right now. I think the best is yet to come for these guys for sure.
You know what I love about them, Mike? I love that they went out and they got the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year to transfer into their program, and they turned him into a guy that can go out and get you 20 on any given night when you need it. When they made their run late against Villanova last night, it was because they just gave the ball to Darryl Morcell and just said, "Go get a bucket," and he did it like 4 or 5 times in a row.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had this question posed to me by someone today on some radio show I did or something, and that was the exact team I picked. I totally agree with you. If there's a Final Four team in the Big East, I believe it's Marquette. I love Kolek. I think he's terrific, and I
There's
think
something about lefties. It just feels like they're so much more fun to watch. I don't know what it is. Lefty basketball players, lefty hitters. It's just something about them.
he has such terrific vision, and has such great instincts for how to run an offense. Done an amazing job, and I agree that Morcell was a really tough, mentally tough player at Maryland, and as an analyst for the Big Ten Network, I saw a ton of him and analyzed halftime, post game, a lot of his games, and he always was a warrior, a guy that they could count on. And so him being at Marquette was a huge addition. Yeah, I talked to them early in the year about how do you transpose a leader into a program that where he's brand new. Well, the advantage that Marquette has in that is that everybody's new. Head coach is new, point guard's new. Justin Lewis is like the only guy that's been there just about. And so he's been able to do that because of that. And as a matter of fact, he and Justin go way back, and Justin's kind of always looked up to him. So the chemistry of that group for a team that's been together a very short time is tremendous.
They're both Baltimore guys, right?
Yes.
Is that the connection?
Yeah, they played for Team Mello, and so they knew each other from that.
Those Baltimore guys are always tough, so it's good to see. I want to ask both you guys this question. Ashton, why don't you take it first? How worried are you about Villanova right now?
Believe it or not, I'm not that worried. And the reason why they stick with their guns, they have an identity. The one thing they need to do is just shoot the ball better. I think they've been inconsistent, perimeter shooting. Those games where they just don't shoot the ball well, those are the games they typically lose. Also, defensively, keeping guys in front of them. I think one-on-one defense has been an issue, especially when they're not making shots. And that's a typical basketball thing, especially for younger guys. But I'm not really worried, believe it or not, just because they do have an identity. They're a veteran team. They've been here. So, one game, I don't see one game turning into 3 or 4 losses. I see a bad loss here and there, but they stick with their guns. They know who they are. And Jay Wright, he's been through it at the end of the day. So, I always have trust in coaches like that.
Yeah, if you look at their season on the whole, I mean, the only team in the league that they've had a lot of trouble with is Marquette. I mean, it's, they've won, going back to New Year's, they've won every other league game they've played. They have limitations. I mean, they don't have a rim protector. They're one of the lowest teams in the country in terms of blocking shots, and that that impacts how dominant you can be on defense. But even at that, they're still 21st in the country in efficiency on defense, which tells you they know how to play. They know how to keep teams out of what they want to run. They are able to be an effective team. I think that the absence of a shot blocker limits their ceiling, but that doesn't mean they can't match up their way into a Elite Eight or Final Four. They've got enough. They've got enough guys who can really go from Gillespie on down to Justin Moore, guys like that. That there's too many really good players there. Remember, they were not that far off a year ago from taking out Baylor in the Sweet 16, and that was with Collins sitting up in the stands.
Yeah, without Gillespie, there's just a culture there, right? You guys both kind of reference it. There's a culture and expectation of winning, and I think that that's a very difficult thing to instill. Speaking of an expectation of winning, we talked about Big East teams that can make a run to the Final Four, and we have not yet mentioned the team that is sitting in first place by 2 games. That is the Providence Friars. They are another team. They're kind of like Wisconsin, where they have their profile is really, really strong. They have some incredible wins. Their metrics, though, they're not loaded in KenPom. I think that I'm bringing it up right now. They are 49th right now in KenPom. In the net, they are someplace.
I think it's 30, right around 30 last time I looked.
It's 30th in KenPom, but they won at Wisconsin. They beat Texas Tech at home. They have a win over UConn on the road. They've beaten Seton Hall, which doesn't look great anymore, but it's still Seton Hall. They got that win at Xavier. They beat Marquette at home. They're 9-1 in the Big East. What do they need to do, I guess, Mike? What do you think they need to do to kind of prove themselves to the nation, or have they already done it?
Well, I think the metric aspect of this has become so pervasive, and that's not a criticism. It just is. I think sometimes you can lean on it a little hard, but those numbers are important and they say a lot. But the one thing that I think that there's the part of the predictive concept that is, misguided, is the idea that the teams that keep winning close games aren't extraordinary, that there's not something about them. When you look at the other side of the coin, and there are teams that keep losing close games. So there's a difference between those two sides of the coin. And you watch Purdue at the end of that Marquette game, and Marquette's really good. And somebody, when have you ever seen a dunk like Nate Watson's dunk in that circumstance? Not like beginning of the game, and but like in that moment, he takes on 3 guys and throws it down and gets fouled, and that's a huge moment in that game. Like, that doesn't happen, but that's the kind of player that they have, the kind of mental toughness that I'm going to go up and make this happen. And I think there's something to that. And so, yeah, would I bet on them? And I'm not a bettor, but would I bet on them to make a run or to win, to make the Final Four, whatever? No, it's probably not a great investment, because the numbers say that they're probably going to get into one of those games against a really good team and find out themselves on the wrong side. But if they're in that game, they're going to have an advantage in that. It doesn't mean they win it every time, but they're going to know that they've done this 10 other times and that they could do it again.
Yeah, I think the perfect example of that is UConn. UConn is 1-8 the last 2 years in games decided by 5 points or less. There's a mindset, right, Ash? And I struggle to find a way to kind of put it into words, but when you expect to win versus hoping to win, that's when you become a great program. Villanova expects to win close games. UConn hopes to win close games. And I think Providence has gotten to the point where they kind of expect to win those close games, especially this season.
Oh, for sure. I think it comes from Ed Cooley. He has a certain confidence about him. He just has, yeah, he has an aura about him that feeds off on his players. This is one of the hardest playing teams in America, for sure. They play hard on both ends of the court. They play together. They take, they take a good shot and make it a great shot. Everybody is just being unselfish. And I just think defensively, that's where they hang their hat as well. They really keep guys in front. They're tough. They're not afraid of anybody. And then, like you said, Rob, they expect to win. I think that's what Marquette is doing right now. They're going into games expecting to win, high expectations, high standards, and they're living up to it.
All right, so we got to get to a break here pretty quickly, but we've talked a little bit about Providence and we've talked about Wisconsin, two teams that aren't great in the metrics, but have some unbelievable wins. Mike, Kentucky, I think, is the opposite of that. They are 8th right now in the net. They're 4th right now on KenPom, and they've won at Kansas by 20, which is a fantastic win. But they're also 4-4 against quad one opponents, and it seems like for most of the brackets that I've looked at, including our bracket over at Fielding the 68, our bracketology show, which will be streaming tomorrow at 6 p.m. right here on this YouTube channel. We have them seated above the teams that have those better wins, and I get the feeling that you might disagree with that.
Well, I don't think at this point that they should be seated ahead of either Wisconsin or Providence. Ahead of some teams that have better wins or slightly or better quad one records, for instance. They're ahead of some of them. I probably had Kentucky 2 lines ahead of where they should be, so to speak, based on their accomplishments for most of the last 2-3 weeks. But at some point, you have to go out there on the floor and prove it if you're going to be seated.
When you say top. You had them 2 lines above where they were, how much of that is like an expectation that, okay, look, we've seen what they are. They're going to get better. This resume is going to end up looking better. I need to have them higher than they are.
I think this, to extent it might be considered to be metric. I mean, because they like blew out Carolina. They just get a win over a team that's an 8-9 type seed. They just dominated it. So those kinds of things have fed into why I've had them up there 2 lines ahead. And also because to an extent, when they went to LSU, they lost Xavier Wheeler early in the game. When they went to Auburn, same thing happened. So there's also that feeling that, those games might have gone a little differently. I don't usually pay that much attention to injury because everybody's had some injury somewhere or some COVID absence or whatever. So it's hard to keep. Yeah, I know the committee is aware of all of them, but you can't factor them all in. So, but I think that probably played into it just a little bit because it sort of feeds again into the whole metrics, margin of victory, obvious power and obvious potential that they have.